You will receive a copy of this webinar and a PowerPoint in a few days via email. We'll have opportunities for questions throughout the presentation. So we'll have kind of a break at a halfway point, and then we'll get through some questions at the end of the session. My name is Jillian Sitar, and I'm the Senior Higher Education Program Manager here at Schoolhouse Connection. I work to transition our students to and through higher education by sharing a variety of best practices that we know that works to support our students and also remove barriers for our students as well through various federal and state policy advocacy. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national organization based in Washington, D.C. with a mission to overcome homelessness through education. And you can learn more about us on our website or by joining our Facebook page. Schoolhouse Connection is part of a national campaign with Education Leads Home. ELH has 3 goals that are listed here on the slide. So 1 for early childhood, 1 for high school graduation, and then 1 for post-secondary education. And so as you can see from the slide, most of these goals have some sort of like an increase rate. So, for high school graduation, 90% of high school graduation rate will be increased by 2030, and so forth. And so in order to figure out, this increased rate and hopefully see these rates increasing, we need to have a baseline number and data to compare and see, this progress, which is where our California state has come in with their work, which we're so excited to share today. And this webinar is going to be kind of set up into 2 parts. So first, we'll hear from our California Homeless Youth Project to see this practice portion of identifying and helping youth and seeing the data of youth homelessness. And then we'll turn it over to my colleague, Alian, to hear more about the policy side. And then this really just kind of shows a picture of how the practice and the data can then inform policy and vice versa. But before we jump right into Pixie and the California Homeless Youth Project, I just want to give, a quick reminder. I'm sure folks know this already, but when we're talking about homelessness within the realm of education, we're using the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which is defined as individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime housing. So this is broader than some of the other definitions of homelessness that the government uses because it includes things like couch surfing or doubling up. And so you can kind of see on this gray section on the side here, different examples of what homelessness looks like within the McKinney-Vento definition, and also the percentage of McKinney-Vento students that were identified in those living situations during the 2019-2020 school year. And so almost 80% of those students were living in those doubled up scenarios. But with all that being said, it is extremely hard to navigate the different definitions of homelessness and the rates and the data. And I'm so excited to partner with the California Homeless Youth Project to share their youth count dashboard. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pixie to take us off.
Good morning. I think we're still using the other PowerPoint, but that's okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Pixie Popwell. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the project director of the California Homeless Youth Project. And I do apologize by looking in different directions. The wrong camera is working this morning, so bear with me. If you're not familiar, the California Homeless Youth Project is actually a research and policy initiative out of the California Research Bureau, which is nested in the California State Library. And we're really focused on bringing youth voice to the policy table and to make sure that their needs are brought to legislators and stakeholders and community leaders. Any of our projects are grant funded. And so the Schoolhouse Connection actually is one of those funders in addition to the California Wellness Foundation and the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the U Count dashboard, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll kind of do a walkthrough and then go into some more how, basically. So the intention is a lot like Jillian was talking about, is youth data when experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity is everywhere and in disparate places and presented in different ways, and it's not always accessible in multiple ways. And so with that, we know that data is used to leverage policy, to request funding, to also be able to create programs and justify positions. And so if we're not having that, then it's really hard to advocate for those things. So our intention was focusing in California is to make a community-facing dashboard and the first step was to have all publicly available data on youth homelessness in one place. And then we've been working on the additional phases about finding community collected data and also presenting that, because we know that the publicly available data is not comprehensive. So some of those partners, right, are faith-based organizations, nonprofits that don't get HUD funding and things like that. If you want to go one more. And so the basis of the front of the dashboard, which I'll shift to in just a second, are these 6 measures. And so this is what kind of will pop up. And so we did youth homelessness is one, which is based on the 2020 point in time count. And with that is what percentage of all homelessness in California, or we broke it down into continuums of care, do youth make up? And then next to that is beds for youth. So based on that number, right, how many youth that are experiencing homelessness, how many beds are specifically dedicated to them? And that's based on the housing inventory count additional to in 2020. Unaccompanied youth, right, youth that are not connected to parents or guardians. And that's based on the homeless data integration system is the California's collective hub for the homeless management information system, which does collect across the state homelessness data. Unsheltered youth, again, this was back based on the point in time count. So youth that are sleeping outdoors and unsheltered. The youth under 18. So this is youth that can be with families or can be unaccompanied, but just again, representing that under 18 number, because often we do want to highlight that transitional age youth, that 18 to 24 are still youth and experiencing homelessness, but we don't want to lose that narrative that youth under 18 are also continuing to have to navigate this. And then we also represented the student homelessness, which is based on the 2021 California Department of Education. And so I'm going to walk y'all through just our dashboard really quickly. And so I'm going to share my screen and let's see, desktop. Okay, perfect. Can everybody see my screen? Cool, because I know sometimes it wants to do its own thing. So this is our dashboard, and my intention, the first intention with this is to make it accessible, one place for all data, and then also digestible, right? If you're just throwing numbers at everybody and you can't digest it, it does no good. My second intention was showing you this is to, if this is an effort that you want to do or replicate in your area, it's possible, and also to give you those tools. So as you can see here are those 6 measures. Up on top are just some highlights, again, for folks kind of to digest different places, but I'll go to that in a minute. So this actually navigates based on continuums of care. And I did that not because like counties or things like that aren't important, but often funding is disseminated based on continuums of care. And that's where advocacy can be leveraged. So just selecting, so I'll select Glendale or Humboldt. Okay, that's what clicked. And so when clicked, the dashboard measures change. And so here you'll see that it's the youth homelessness and then youth homeless students are both compared to California as a whole. So in Humboldt, 9 of all homelessness, youth make up 9% and that's seen as 18% for the state of California. However, there's only enough beds for less than 1% of the youth experiencing homelessness in Humboldt, right? So we've got, so 9% of the population, yet there's only 5 beds, right? And we know here, right, that there's 168 youth that are unaccompanied alone, right? And then there's 221 that are under 18. So 5 beds aren't enough. And so, and basically navigating through that. In addition to presenting it in this way, I know that some folks digesting can be a little bit different. And so we also present it in mapped form. So, so both like with the housing and urban development data and then also education data. So it you can select, so we can do unsheltered, unaccompanied youth. And so the map itself will change. And as you hover, you can see, so for instance, San Bernardino, there's 174 unsheltered, unaccompanied youth, and there's only 22 beds available. So they have less than 1% as well, enough beds available for their use. And again, I paired this intentionally with beds available because often we hear these numbers, right? We hear, oh, this, but we don't often hear what is being done about it, right? There might be programs offering drop-in or food or things like that, but how many actual beds? Because that is the solution, right? Housing is the solution. So, and also funding. But so that's why it's always compared to that. With education, you can look at it through the homeless enrollment rate, or you can change it to secondary measures. And with that, we have chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, suspension rate, and then UC-CSU ready. So for graduation rate, like for our Alpine and Mono counties, graduation rate for overall is, so for homeless students is 29.3%. Which isn't that great, right? So again, just trying to be able to provide that data for folks to be able to use it as they need. Two extra things that we provided is, do you know where your continuum of care is? Often, right, if folks are in school districts or different things, maybe they know what county, but don't know what continuum of care. So we actually broke that down so you could, are you an assembly person? Are you in higher education? You know, do you need to find your continuum of care? So if you can select like assembly district, oh, hey, this assembly person actually crosses multiple continuums of care, which is important when advocating for funding, that like this person might be for multiple. In addition to that, say, okay, well, now I know that what continuum of care I am, but what's in my continuum of care? So for instance, coming back with Humboldt, Humboldt County is in it, but then, oh, here's my assembly and my Senate person. Here's the people to contact within my continuum of care. And then what school districts, what higher education, and then what trade schools are in my area. So again, so being collaborative, things like that. So really just trying to give all the tools to someone to be able to, one, navigate our dashboard, but also be able to navigate their community. The last place, and this is more for folks that want to take the data with them, we presented it in table form, broken down into each of these dashboards, or not dashboards, the databases, that how they're presented. So as I was saying earlier, the homeless data integration system is based off of the homeless management information system. And so we broke that down of like, what do they say youth homelessness looks like in their dashboard. Below each table, we offered the explanation of what that database collects. And then we also noted, why would this number look different than another number? So for instance, or why would it be low? So for instance, with the homeless management information system, non-HUD funded programs will not be represented in this data. And then also if youth, often if they fall into a McKinney-Vento definition, they might not fall into the HUD definition of homelessness. And so as you scroll down, you can see other numbers that were also presented in the actual dashboard, but then you can go to, right, like education, nighttime residents, youth under 6, and then we have the colleges. And then community level data is just like early childhood and former foster. You can do this. This is presented for California, but going back to the dashboard, down here, as you toggle between the continuums of care, you can also get this for that continuum of care specifically, right? So it's broken down. So that's just a little bit about our dashboard. And then if we could, I'm going to stop screen sharing, maybe. And then we'll go back to the PowerPoint really quick. Thanks, Jillian. Awesome. Okay, so with this, actually go back some, we're ahead a little bit. Oh, maybe not. Okay, just kidding. And then go one more, maybe. Okay, that's right. So you saw the image that was just, and because I think, yeah, it's a little bit out of order, but that's okay. So we also did a dive in, right, of that community data through a pilot. And so that was kind of the team that helped research. But pivoting to here is another way that I wanted to be able to break down this information, because it's a lot, right? Like I know just kind of scrolling through that dashboard is a lot. What I wanted to do as well is I put in the chat the actual link so that you can snoop it some more on your own time. But another way that we wanted to break it down is let's have a conversation about it, right? So often this can, for legislators, for, maybe like COC advisory boards, maybe that's too much information or too much independent, and it needs a little bit more direction. So we broke that into a data story, and you can go to the next slide. So a few things of how we did that is presenting the data right next to each other. So for California instance, right? So we have the point in time count, or the PIT count, which is that given night in January where they go out and count, which is problematic in and of itself, because somebody has to be experiencing homelessness, with often youth don't fit that typical definite look, and often it might be couch surfing, or maybe not where others are found. Oh, if you copy it and put, I see that this is not a link. If you copy it and put it into a web page, it should work. If not, I'll get it for, it's also linked in this PowerPoint, but I'll get it for you. And then the homeless management information system. And then we see here, right, the McKinney-Vento definition, right? So look, that stark difference. And so just kind of presenting it next to each other. If you go to the next slide. Another way we wanted to present this is with social math, right? So the homeless management information system, because it's kind of that middle number, right? Said that in California, there's over 72,000 youth experiencing homelessness. That is enough to sell out the SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, right? Like that helps, but it's a gross number to digest, but that's helpful to digest that number, right? But then if we kind of pivot right to the McKinney-Vento definition, that to over 274,000, that's the same amount of children and youth that live in the entire city of San Diego, right? Like that's obnoxious a number, right? So again, just kind of trying to give that information in multiple ways to really kind of get that picture through. And then we can go one more. And that stark contrast, right? So that PIT count number that often funding is disseminated by, right? Programs are started up and things like that based on this PIT count number compared to the McKinney-Vento number, right? That it's 10 times the number. And next slide. And then this other piece, right, that Jillian was talking about, often the definitions, we know that they're different. We know that the numbers are different, but why? And they're not, and it can get confusing, right? Like homelessness is what I do, and it can be confusing. So I wanted to break that down and present it in a way that is, again, digestible. And so I kind of thought about, like, if you're ever buying, like a Spotify or a Netflix account, right? You've got like the pro, you've got the family, and you get to see what's included in them. So I wanted to kind of present the definitions within that. So broken down into residing in a place not meant for human habitation, temporary housing, permanent housing, and shared housing. So, and you can see what is included, right? And what is not included, and how that can increase the number, right? So obviously, McKinney-Vento has the most inclusive number, but you can see how much that actually affects youth when these points are not included, right? Because that's often, and so we know that that's often then the situations youth find themselves in. So that's an additional one. And then the next, so our team, how do we address this, right? So one of the things I wanted to do is I used to run 3 housing programs in Sacramento, and none of our data, none of our youth, and none of our housing was in HMIS. So I knew that exists, right? There are programs everywhere that don't enter into HMIS and those youth might not get captured in the point in time count. So we decided to do a pilot in addition to just this dashboard to see what kind of community data, what can we find out about the communities and data we can find in addition to what is presented. So we chose 3 continuums of care: Sacramento, San Diego, and Humboldt. And we did this for a multitude of reasons, but we wanted to represent that urban, rural, suburban continuums of care. We wanted to also, there was a research put out showing the difference between from 2017 to 2020 what the rate of youth homelessness was. So with these, San Diego actually had a decrease, is one of the rare only that had the decrease in youth homelessness. And then Humboldt had an over 150% increase in youth homelessness. And Sacramento also had an increase about of 40%. And so, right, that doesn't tell us a whole bunch, right? Is why, why did the number increase? Why did it decrease? Could it have been they actually got better at collecting data and finding youth? And so that's why the number increased, right? So because they actually had the measure. Or did they lose funding programs, things like that? So this is kind of the what those looked like, what the communities look like for the 3 that we picked. You can go to the next slide. So what we did is we did a collaborative planning process and reach out for these communities. So we did outreach. We then did interviews with different agencies. And then we tried to do data collection and data analysis. And then we did that community level data, not comparison, but addition to that data. Next slide. During that collaborative planning session, we did kind of a brainstorm, like looking at, all right, so if these places might not be included in HUD funded, how do youth find them, right? So we actually did kind of a brainstorming and also research of like, if I was a youth trying to look for programs, what would I do, right? So we looked up kind of, these are some of those questions. It's like, where can I find free hygiene products? Where can I find free food? Is there an LGBT like emergency place, right? Like things like that. And we kind of like looked at in all of these areas, where would those be, and tried to reach out to those agencies that fell into those Google searches, basically. Next slide. So our outreach strategies were to send like personalized emails, right? Because emails, I know for me, like they get lost, whether they get eaten by Outlook or they just get buried. Making sure that they're personalized and also being aware of what email that they're coming from was really helpful. One thing we noticed between the rural and urban continuums of care is that actually in rural, cold calling was actually more effective. There's a lot more approach of that kind of grassroots, or it's kind of like there's not a lot of folks, and so the cold calling actually got more contact. And then in urban, the cold emailing actually got more effective communication. And then when folks agreed to do interviews, we actually asked them in the interviews, do you have any recommendations for other communities or agencies to reach out to see if we could get more data? Next, please. So we wanted to make it, especially for this first pilot part, as easy as possible to provide data to us. We wanted it in like aggregated, so we're not asking for personal information. We weren't wanting to, mess up any of the HIPAA, FERPA, none of that. So it's just kind of numbers. What are you like? What is your picture of youth homelessness in your agency? And so we actually created a submission form, and we're working on kind of version 2 to make it a little bit more streamlined. But if folks didn't have an Excel spreadsheet or any of that, we just provided this of like, hey, can you just fill this form out? And so some of the demographical data that we requested or we received were like that age. So which area did they fall into? Their racial and ethnic identity, LGBTQ plus identification, maybe mental health, which kind of more looking at that PTSD or depression. Substance use, just either current or previous. Some of our agencies were harm reduction agencies, so that's kind of a focus that they had. Parenting or pregnancy status, student status, and then the experience of homelessness was like kind of how long have they been experiencing, or depending on what type of agency that they were. Next slide, please. So based on capacity, right? So this is a project that will be continuing for the next 3 years, but based on capacity, we identified, over 100 agencies that aren't like represented anywhere else. We outreached to about 100. We interviewed a little over 15, and we got data from 5, basically. Right, so this was a large effort. And while we didn't get a lot of data, it did tell us a lot, right? The capacity of folks, what is needed. What we found was, again, in Humboldt specifically, as they were our rural example, was that the infrastructure of their data collection was needing support. And for instance, one folks that actually supported the Cal Poly Humboldt actually kept all of her data in saved emails, right? So that's hard, right? When you know that you need to like advocate for maybe another staff person or more funding, or you need more food or whatever that is, it's, it's hard to do that. So that we actually used that information. While we didn't get a lot of data, we use that information to pivot for this next grant for the 3 years, to be able to provide technical assistance, to have, do they need Microsoft Office? Do they need a online database, to be able to provide that and give them kind of best practices? Next slide, please. So kind of moving forward a little bit, like I was saying, is we're going to continue to collaborate with continuums of care. We're going across California. So at the end of 3 years, I'm hoping to have additional data for all 44 continuums of care. And so we're going to, because our goal is San Diego actually has a community integrated information exchange. And we want to model that across the state, right? Why don't gaps happen when we can't speak to one another? And so our goal is to kind of have that integration and to kind of move to that. So that collaboration with continuums of care, being like, are you connected to HDIS, or what technical assistance do you need? But ensuring that the intention is through centering client care, to make sure that this data and all of the work that we're doing, make sure that we're not losing the voice of youth experiencing homelessness, and making sure that there are low barriers. Then I think that's it. And then questions. Yeah. And I see that somebody has their hand raised.
Yeah, so the person who has their hand raised, if they want to put their question in the chat, that would be great. But Pixie, there are a few questions already in the Q&A. Okay. So one, they're asking if they can use these slides crediting California Homelessness Project. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I don't do the intellectual property thing. I made this for y'all to use to share, and I will make sure y'all get those links again, both for the data story and for the dashboard, and use as you need.
Great. And you'll also get a copy of this PowerPoint once we have the recording, so you'll get that in a few days. Other questions, can you clarify why would permanent housing projects be considered when counting homeless youth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's kind of like the piece of permanent housing actually means permanent housing. With youth, it often doesn't. Permanent housing can be for as short as 2 years, so that 48 months, and the longest I think it is actually 5. And so it's not permanent housing. And often there is data, and I can get that for you as well, that youth don't make it because of the supports that aren't in that permanent housing. They don't get through the longevity of the program. So if the supports aren't there, then there isn't actually housing stability. So depending on when that is why the permanent housing would be included. See that. And then the question about how is this funded, specifically my project was through the 3 funders, and so we're continuing on with that. But most of our cost is literally just getting, like, putting the dashboard up and then being able to support youth and communities and being able to provide or continue their work. It's not often kept for us. Yes, I am absolutely 100% willing to set up or provide technical assistance to recreate this project. There are actually, I'm putting together a toolkit that you can, it looks like this, but it literally walks you through step by step, in depth, how to repeat this process. Also, as we're continuing this, lessons learned, right? Like I don't need you to make the same mistakes that we did. So even though learning experiences, so I'm absolutely, that is my goal, is anybody that wants to do this, I'm happy to. And
We have
then
another question about how long it took. Awesome.
yeah, so because it's two parts, the dashboard itself was done just by me. So that's one thing, is that you count a team that you saw. So the California Homeless Youth Project is me, the project of one. And so the dashboard itself was put together. I started doing the research of gathering all of the databases that exist in June of last year. And the dashboard itself went up in January. So it took about, was that like 7 months just to do the dashboard. So the community outreach started in September, October of last year, and it's still ongoing. We did notice that, just again, because we're continuing to do it during the pandemic that seems never ending, that people have taken on, they already wore 17 hats, now they're wearing 27. And so we have people that and communities that we're still engaging with, and we want to continue those partnerships. But that kind of community data collection is actually what has taken the longest, rather than collecting the data that is publicly available. Yeah. The toolkit should be available at the beginning of July. So we're just right around the corner. I wanted it, I'm a perfectionist. I don't know if y'all could tell. So I wanted that to be a little bit more self-explanatory than the process we had it now. But you can, this slide kind of is that precursor, or these slides are the precursor to the toolkit.
Awesome. And we'll have more time for questions at the end, but now we're going to switch gears a little bit. So now that once we have the data, we have this information, we can then leverage it for our policy side. And so I will turn it over to my colleague Alian to take us through some federal policy updates.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Hello, everyone. Great to be here with you all today, and it's so great to see you all so active in the chat as well. My name is Alian Anderson. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Program Manager at Schoolhouse Connection. I use she, her pronouns, and let's jump right in. So the first thing that we're actually going to be talking about today is federal funding for fiscal year 2023. And with that, so back in March of this year, I am so sorry. My front door, my new apartment is, yeah, I'm sorry, I just got that thing. Anyways, so back in March of 2022, Congress finally passed the fiscal year 2022 budget. And in that, they allocated $114 million for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, which is the only federal education program dedicated to removing barriers to education for children and youth experiencing homelessness, and $140.3 million for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs. So both of these programs together are the actual only federal program, the only two federal programs specifically geared towards meeting the needs of children and youth experiencing homelessness. So with that, our request for fiscal year 2023 that Congress is currently working on are $800 million and $300 million respectively for EHCY and RHYA. Next slide, please. So where did the 800 million come from, you might ask? Well, this actually comes from our campaign at Schoolhouse Connection to make ARP-HCY the new normal. But again, you might be like, what is ARP-HCY? Alian, why are you using all of these acronyms? But it's okay, we're gonna get to that in the next slide. So, next slide, please, Jillian. So ARP-HTY refers to the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Fund, which some of you may be familiar with if you are working in the education or McKinney-Vento side of things, but if you're not, this refers to the $800 million investment in the American Rescue Plan Act. So this passed last March of 2021, of course, and this came as a result of advocacy efforts that were absolutely done in conjunction with the, we can't acknowledge this without bigging up the McKinney-Vento liaisons who participated in a survey called Lost in the Mass Shuffle and Virtual Void that Schoolhouse Connection released back in fall of 2020, which really showed the drop in enrollment and identification of students experiencing homelessness that came as a result of the pandemic and school building closures. And this data that we were able to collect through the survey, again, bringing up the use of data in advocacy, really helped to show the urgency that Congress needed to act with in terms of ensuring that we're meeting the needs of these vulnerable students at a time when they're facing even more vulnerabilities than prior to the pandemic. So this $800 million was 8 times the annual appropriation of the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. And as you remember, I mentioned that in fiscal year 2022, it was allotted $114 million, which is even after the American Rescue Plan Act. So what SHC is doing now, we are advocating for the $800 million to be sustained moving forward, as this is what we believe is finally getting to the right size for the program. As previously with the $100 million allocation for EHCY, only 24% of local educational agencies were able to receive a subgrant. So next slide, please, Jillian. So with that, we know that, of course, it's a huge jump to ask to move from 114 to 800 million. But the great thing is that we've already been seeing congressional support. So I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about the Dear Colleague letter, which refers to a Dear Colleague letter is basically a request that goes from a small group of members of Congress. It could be 2 or 3 members of Congress to other members of Congress, asking them to show support, to sign on in support of certain federal programs or a bill or a funding request. So we worked with our congressional champions for EHCY and RHYA to put together a Dear Colleague letter calling for the $800 million to be sustained. And we received a record number of signatures. We got 92 members of Congress to sign on to this letter to show support for continuing the ARP-HCY funding, and also for the appropriation request of $300 million for RHYA, which was a huge deal. And I feel like it's something that should definitely motivate us to reach out to our members of Congress and urge them to continue to support this funding request. Next slide, please. So if you're wondering just a little bit about what's happening right now, so the US House Appropriations Subcommittee, which is the Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services, and they have jurisdiction over EHCY and RHYA funding levels. They will actually be voting on proposed funding levels for FY23 tomorrow, this Thursday. So if you're wondering what you can do, next slide, please, Jillian. We ask that you reach out to your US representatives and your senators and urge them to support these robust increases for EHCY and RHYA. And we try to make things as easy for you guys as possible, because we know that a lot of you are wearing so many hats. So, if you want to participate in advocacy and reach out to your members of Congress, we have this easy action form that takes literally like 2 minutes or less to fill out. Honestly, you could probably fill it out before we finish this webinar. And all you do is you just put in your zip code. It brings up your representatives and senators. We already have a template letter that you can send, and then it sends it off to them. So you can easily urge them to support these requests. And I will send that link in the chat box as well. Next slide, please, as we discuss a couple of other top federal legislative priorities for homeless children and youth. Next slide, please, Jillian. So we heard from Jillian and from Pixie earlier about the barriers that are posed with the conflicting definitions. So here comes the Homeless Children and Youth Act. So what this bill would do is it would align the HUD definition. It would broaden the HUD definition to encompass all the ways that are experienced, all the ways that children and youth experience homelessness that are typically reflected through the education definition. So it would align the HUD definition with the education definition of homelessness. It also does a couple of other things that would just help communities in serving, in really being able to serve the persons in their communities according to their needs, rather than having to follow these instructions from the top down, but really getting to assess your community and see the needs that they need, see the things that they need. So it would also require HUD to honor local community priorities and needs in terms of plans for services and improve data collection on homelessness. And so the current status of this bill is it has 15 co-sponsors in total, which is also a record number for the number of co-sponsors that the Homeless Children and Youth Act has had over the years that it's been reintroduced. And I just also want to add that don't be alarmed by hearing that it's been reintroduced various times, because generally at the federal level, things do take quite a while to happen, and it does take time to gain the support and just to get things done. I'm sure we've all been following, or at least to some degree, we've seen what's been going on in at the federal level lately, and things have been moving even slower than usual, but we will never give up the fight. This is one of our top priorities always, to ensure that our children and youth, the most vulnerable children and youth, are able to get the services that they need. And this is a fight that will be won eventually. Next slide, please. So speaking of things taking a long time to occur at the federal level, I want to talk a little bit about the FAFSA Simplification Act, which was passed back in December 2020 as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, or the second COVID relief package. And this actually came as a result of a decade of advocacy. But this is actually a wonderful thing to just show you what happens when you're persistent at the federal level, which is just what it requires. So the FAFSA Simplification Act removes several barriers to education, to higher education for youth experiencing homelessness. And some of the biggest things that it does is it will remove the requirement for unaccompanied homeless youth to have to redetermine their status as an unaccompanied homeless youth every single year, which I'm sure a lot of us know is a very arduous, time-consuming, stressful process that deters a lot of youth from continuing in post-secondary. So it removes that requirement. It also allows additional entities to make the determinations of an unaccompanied homeless youth status. So this will now include the directors of emergency shelters or transitional living programs, also the persons in charge of TRIO or Gear Up programs. So it's even broader than liaisons, RHYA programs, and HUD programs. And also, in addition to this, financial aid administrators will also be required to make determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth who aren't able to get determinations from any of these other outlets for whatever reason. So there are some other provisions, and we have a link here so you can read all of them, and it's super interesting. And some of these provisions, so with the FAFSA Simplification Act, because of the fact that it requires a huge overhaul of their technical system, some of the provisions are actually going to be delayed. Some of them are going to be delayed until the 2024 to 2025 school year, which means you won't see some of the changes of the general FAFSA until next October. But we have been working with the Department of Education. We've been steadily advocating. So some of these provisions specifically for homeless and foster youth are actually slated to go into effect this upcoming school year. So they will go into effect starting this October. Hallelujah. And we're super excited about that. Next slide, please. Continuing along the lines of removing barriers to higher education. So another bill that we are advocating for, and another one of our top priorities, is the Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth Act, or as we lovingly call it at SHC, HESHFE, because it's quite a mouthful as well. So it goes a little further to remove barriers to higher education after the FAFSA simplification. So some of the things that it does, and one of the monumental things that it does actually, is it would require the designation of higher education liaison. So similar to how we have McKinney-Vento liaisons at the K-12 level. So it would require institutions of higher ed to have a higher education liaison for homeless and foster youth to be able to identify as the point person at their institutions. It would also require them to make plans during breaks for homeless students and give them priority for on-campus housing. It would provide homeless and foster youth with in-state tuition and some other, again, really incredible, great provisions. And so this is what we're advocating for right now. So next slide, please. So again, I have another ask for you. In addition to the first action form related to FY23, which is the funding for right now, we'd also urge everyone to ask your representatives and senators to co-sponsor the Homeless Children and Youth Act. We want to see that 15 go to 50, and also to co-sponsor the Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth Act. So each of these links that are in the presentation that will be made available to everyone after, they also link to other action forms that you can, again, just fill out easily if you input your information, and you will it will send the letter to your representatives and senators. Oh, thank you so much, Pixie. And in case you're interested in advocacy or just staying up to date with what's going on with HESHFI, what's going on with FY23, especially as we move to the Senate and their deliberation of FY23 next month in July, I encourage everyone to sign up for our newsletter to stay in the loop. We'll be providing our federal policy updates, action alerts, and all of that good stuff. And it's a really great newsletter. I just think it's a great newsletter. I might be a tiny bit biased, but it is a great newsletter. And I think that's it.
I second that. So, and it's not my newsletter.
If Pixie says it, then it's just true.
So as we're waiting for some questions to come in, either in the Q&A and chat, just want to do a few reminders of resources. Well, first of all, thank you, Alian, for that federal overview and to show how folks can get involved with advocacy efforts. We're so appreciative of all the work that you're doing. I just wanted to take a moment to share that our Youth Leadership and Scholarship Program, the application for the 2022-2023 school year is now live, and it will go all the way up until October 15th. So this is applicable for our upcoming seniors, not for our current seniors that just graduated and going for college. That application cycle has already happened. This is for the 2022-2023 school year. This is such an amazing program. Our team has been with students the last 2 weeks. We're getting a little break and then going to see another batch of students in in a few weeks in DC in July. And it's such a really awesome opportunity for students from all across the country to meet other students who might have similar shared experiences. They're able to build that sense of community. They have wraparound support from our team, from their peers. And it truly is like a Schoolhouse Connection little family. So if you want more information, you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint with this link, but the eligibility requirements are here on the slide. So you must be residing in the US, and undocumented students are eligible for this program. 2, born on or after October 15th, 2022. You must be starting college for the first time in 2023. And that college can look like a 4-year institution, a 2-year college, community college, or a trade school, and then have experienced homelessness in the last 6 years. So really great program. Just wanted to highlight that, to please share that with your students for the upcoming school year. And here are other links and resources. So again, you'll get a copy of all of this. And I will see if there are any questions before we wrap up here. I see Alian just answered one question in the chat, but we'll see if folks have any other questions for the next few minutes or so. Or Pixie and Alian, if you have any last words to share to our attendees, I'll open up to you all as well.
I'll just say thank you to everyone for being such a great audience.
This is a great reason to work before 8 a.m.
Yes, thank you for everyone on the West Coast that is joining us. I know it is early, but we are so glad you were able to tune in. Again, you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint and this webinar in a few days, but thank you all so much. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Pixie and Alian, thank you again for sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you,
Bye,
Jen.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Do you want me to stop?